Good to see you, everybody, tonight. We are in the book of Ezekiel, and we're moving on into chapter 6 tonight. I rapidly finished chapter 5 last week and thought we had covered the material, so we could move on. So I wanted to get into chapter 6 this evening. It is lesson 4. If you're following along in the lesson sheets, it is lesson 4 in that series, and I'll show that to you on the screen as well as we move through this section. Basically, Ezekiel's going to be called to go and prophesy concerning this pending judgment that's coming upon God's people and the devastation that relates to it, and the difficulties that surround it, and pretty vivid details that they offer in relationship to it that are coming in this narrative. The lesson sheet mentions a couple of things to us if you're looking at that. The purpose, the aim, if you will, in this particular segment in these couple of chapters is to appreciate and learn that the day of the Lord cannot be avoided or averted. When God determines that He's going to bring judgment, then and He says there's no turning back from that, then it's coming. And you can't change that path if God determines that that's the path that He's determined to make. And that seems to be the point of this narrative. The theme kind of can be summed up, if you bounce ahead a little bit into verse 9 of Ezekiel chapter 6. He says, "And they that escape of you shall remember me among the nations, whither they shall be carried captives, because I am broken with their whorish heart, which hath departed from me, and with their eyes which go whoring after their idols, and they shall loathe themselves for the evils which they have committed in all their abominations." And so it's interesting because there's judgment. The judgment's going to be severe, but there's going to be a what? There's going to be a remnant, and that remnant's going to have the obligation to do what? To go tell the other nations why this happened back here among God's children. And we'll talk more about that as we move through the study this evening. But that's the basic thought process within these narratives. And there are a couple of other passages. We might see those before we're done in our studies this evening. So let's begin here in chapter 6. Let's back up to verse 1 and take a look at these various segments and answer the questions that we have within the study. And so the very first question that was asked is, what does Jehovah command Ezekiel to decree to the mountains of Israel? So let's begin reading in verse 1. "The word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face toward the mountains of Israel, and prophesy against them. And say, Ye mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord God. Thus saith the Lord God to the mountains, and to the hills, to the rivers, and to the valleys. And behold, I, even I, will bring a sword upon you, and I will destroy your high places. And your altars shall be desolate, and your images shall be broken. And I will cast down your slain men before your idols, and I will lay the dead carcasses of the children of Israel before their idols, and I will scatter your bones round about your altars. In all your dwelling places the cities shall be laid waste, and the high places shall be desolate, and that your altars may be laid waste and made desolate, and your idols may be broken and cease, and your images may be cut down, and your works may be abolished. And the slain shall fall in the midst of you, and ye shall know that I am the Lord." And so what's basically the judgment or the messaging that Ezekiel is to take to the mountains of Israel? Okay, so all the altars and idols that you've built, they're going to be found in ruin, and relationship to that. What else is he decreeing here? Okay, all the places that you had grown so comfortable in, all of that's destroyed.
And everyone who worships them are going to be laid down.
Those who've bowed down to those idols, and it sounds vicious, but those bodies of those that have been worshiping those idols are going to be laid there. You can imagine the imagery of that as those are laid there before those idols. And it's interesting to think about the idea that where were they? Where were these supposed gods that you had created? All of you are being laid dead here before them. Why didn't they help you? And they were supposedly more powerful than your God. They were supposedly more powerful than the God who brought you into this land and provided you all these promises. If they were so powerful and wonderful and beneficial to you, why did this happen? And so you can imagine that imagery that's there. Go ahead, Kent.
That's the point I was going to make is all these false gods that they were serving weren't there for them.
Yeah, where were they? It reminds me a little bit of right? And also reminds me a little bit of the plagues in Egypt. Those plagues weren't arbitrary. And you go back and you look at those plagues, they are very symbolic as to relates to the Egyptian idols and worship and the gods that the Egyptians had served. And those plagues that came upon Egypt were very much specific to illustrating to Egypt that you might have thought you had power, but you don't. And the Creator is far more superior than that. So that's part of this imagery as well. What else did you see? When he says Israel, by the way, who's he referring to? Yeah,
Not the upper kingdom, but
right. He's talking about the same region of Judah. It uses Israel because that's the generic of Israelites and Israel and that. But the Israel, meaning the 10 tribes that divided, they've already been scattered and destroyed. They've already been met with their demise. And so he's not addressing Israel as in the 10 tribes that made up what is commonly referred to Israel during the divided kingdom. He's talking about the mountains of Israel, the Judea in which Judah predominantly reigned. And so that's his reference here. And he calls upon the mountains and the rivers and the valleys and the hills to bring testimony of what they saw, what those hills and mountains and rivers witnessed as it relates to God's people. I believe, my mind's going to, Micah and Malachi, they get jumbled in my mind sometimes, but I believe it's Micah, that minor prophet, that kind of has similar kind of language where they assemble the hills and the mountains to come and be witness against God's people for their behaviors.
And all these things happen, you shall know I am the Lord.
Yeah, that's key. I appreciate you reminding us of that, Jim, because it's important to remember that all of these things are occurring at the end of the day. You're going to know I am the Lord, not those idols you built, not all the things that you put all your stock and faith and hope in. I'm the Lord, and I'm the one that you really should have been accountable to. And this destruction comes by His doing and by His choice. So then, what hope does Ezekiel give to Israel within this evil decree in verse 8? Okay, so there'll be a small remnant. Yet will I leave a remnant. By the way, I believe that principle will hold true throughout all the narrative of the Bible. There appears to be a theme, if you will, within Scripture that talks about the idea that God always will have a remnant. Whether it's Judah here, Israel, there will be this small, sometimes group, but a remnant, right? A remnant isn't the whole. The remnant is a small piece left over. But there always seems to be that small piece left over that are still striving to honor God and serve God and meet with certain benefits, even within the judgments that God brings. And so he decrees there shall be a remnant, that they may have some that shall escape the sword among the nations when ye shall be scattered through the countries. Notice verse 9. So the secondary question was then, to whom is this promise limited? They that escape of you shall remember me among the nations, whither they shall be carried captives. This is verse 9. Because I am broken with their whorish heart, which hath departed from me, and with their eyes, which go a-whoring after their idols, and they shall loathe themselves for the evils which they have committed in all their abominations. And they shall know that I am the Lord, and that I have not said in vain that I would do this evil unto them. And so, a remnant, but why? And how is it limited?
it's the people who mourn
Okay.
for what has happened, but instead of blaming God, that they remember that God said this would happen.
Okay. So it's a remnant of people that are actually have a contrite heart in relationship to the condition of the people that brought this need for judgment upon them. What else will they do?
Tell others.
Okay, so they're going to be willing to go tell others and not go tell people, boy, look what God, horrible things He did to us. They're going to go tell people, we what? Yeah, we sinned. We transgressed. We brought this on ourselves. And so, let me ask an extra question in relation to that. Why would that be important? For there to be this remnant to go into these other nations and to tell them why this is occurring.
They're accepting responsibility for what they did in front of these other nations.
Okay, so there's an acceptance of responsibility among these other nations round about them. That's an important piece of this. Why else do you think? Go ahead, Kent.
God's plan for Christ to come hasn't come to fruition yet. So He needs that small remnant to fulfill His promise to Abraham and the forefathers.
Okay, so there's a practical reason why there's going to be a remnant left over. I don't know that he necessarily addresses that in this text, but there is a practical reason why there needs to be a remnant to continue the lineage, so to honor the original promises to Abraham. What else? We'll get there. We're getting there, at least in my mind.
To me, it's so that the remnant will know that He is Lord, and they can tell the rest of them.
Okay.
That His word is going to be passed on down, just like in verse 5 down, where it says He will slay and put them in front of their idols, scatter their bones around the altars.
Yeah.
That was done by the Chaldeans.
Yeah.
But He did it so that they would know who was left.
Yeah.
He was Lord.
Yeah. And I think it's significant to remember, too, that who are they going to go tell this to? Yeah, to the... that's a possibility. I'm not saying he won't, but I want you to go look, unless I'm missing. But notice that he said, verse 8, "Yet will I leave a remnant that ye may have some that shall escape the sword among the nations when ye shall be scattered through the countries." And so when you get, as a remnant to survive, they're going to have to scatter. And when they scatter, they're going to have to scatter into other nations. And when they get there, somebody's going to ask them, what are you doing here? Why? And the answer is because we sinned against Jehovah and He brought destruction. Here's why I believe that that's significant. Otherwise, who's weak? The God of those people is weak. If all they perceive is that these people got decimated, and if all those people that flee and are able to escape, if all they tell people is the great Babylonians came down and destroyed us, then people aren't really going to get the right picture of what's happening there. He needs a remnant of people who are going to be willing to go tell the truth, and that is, we were an abomination before our God. We decided to worship idols rather than our God, and because of that, He chose to bring a judgment against us. It allows for other nations where they're going to be scattered to appreciate the reasoning behind this event. Not that they were just weak or their God was weak, but that their God determined, because of their abominations before Him, to bring this judgment. Now, I'm not arguing. There is some truth to the idea that when those captives come back, they're going to need some people to be able to communicate what did happen here, because there are those in exile who aren't going to be witnesses to those things. And I have no reservation in that idea that they'll be important to that process as well. But there seems to be, in verse 9 anyway, that intent of telling other nations about the God who created this.
Is this scattered Israelites saying that they would be coming back? Or is this like what they consider the lost tribes of Israel?
No, I think when he's talking about this scattering and this remnant again, if you look at verse 9, they that escape of you shall remember me among the nations, whither they shall be carried captives. So in those other places that they land, they're going to go tell the story, how they got there. And some of them will come back, but they're going to, I need people who loathe the reasonings behind this at the end of verse 9. And the end result, verse 10 is, they shall know because of this that I am the Lord, and that I have not said in vain that I do this evil unto them.
And so who are the they in that?
In verse 10,
Yeah, is that they that escape of you? So is that, yeah, who's I want to make sure I'm getting that clear.
yeah, and again, my preface of all answers to Ezekiel could be, but anyway, I think the they of verse 9 are those who escape. They're the remnant, and I believe connectivity would say that the they of verse 10 is connected to those in verse 9. Same group of people. And they shall know. Those people who are scattered into other nations, they're going to know why this happened, and they're going to tell those other people why this happened. So that those nations round about, not those that it happened to and those that they tell, will know that the Lord did this. This wasn't the power of the Babylonians. This wasn't some other great nation who was superior. The remnant's going to know, the nations they tell are going to know, everybody's going to know, I am the Lord. And when I determined to send a prophecy that said, I'm going to bring a judgment, it happened. Just like I said it would. That's what I see.
Back to what Philip
Here it is.
said. In the judgment, this is kind of off the subject, but in the judgment, the righteous that go to judgment will be the remnant of the church. Is that the idea that?
You mean ultimately the saved, if that's what you're referring to, in the end judgment, the final judgment, they would, yes, I would consider them a remnant as well.
Of all the Christian age, they're the remnant.
And I'm trying to follow that, but I'm not sure I am.
Of all the
So-
people or just?
So you're
No, of the church, all the people that have become Christians, yeah, not all of them are going to heaven because they weren't all righteous all the, you know.
But
The
the people
people
that are
that are
saved in judgment, that are in the church, that live kind of like they should, that will be the remnant of the church from its beginnings in Jerusalem. Is that what we're saying?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not disagreeing with you necessarily, but let me back you up because I'm the one that started that. All I'm saying was, I'm not saying that there's a parallel between the remnant of Ezekiel and anything as it relates to final judgment. I'm just saying that God's always had a remnant. And so when salvation comes, that'll be a remnant of all those who have ever existed upon the earth from start to finish. That group of saved will be a small remnant of the whole. That's what I'm saying. I'm not necessarily, I understand. I think I kind of get what you're saying, but that wasn't what I was saying, just to make sure I'm clear on that. I'm talking more generic than that.
In verse 10, where we just used the word they,
Mm-hmm.
is that the same as in verse 8, where the latter part of verse 8, it says, when ye shall be scattered to the countries. Is that the same as ye? Who is ye?
Yes, I think so. The remnant is the ye in verse 8. That remnant is the they of verse 9. And that remnant is the they of verse 10. I think that's the pocket of people. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I see it.
And the them at the end of verse 10 is the same as the they.
That is correct. That's correct. We're talking about, yes. Well,
The evil.
but they're all of them. The them of the end of verse 10 is the whole, right?
We're talking about the Jews,
Yes.
not other nations.
We're not. The only thing the other nations have involved in this is they're going to be told why this calamity happened to Judah and to God's people. That's the only involvement of the other nations in this description that's involved, is they're going to have to be told why it happened, and there's a remnant that's going to go tell them. That's the simplistic view that I see.
I'm trying to think of who it was. Didn't someone tell Nebuchadnezzar, hey, this is nothing that you're doing. God's using you.
Yeah, God has instructed him all along, but it didn't help him always because he took some pride in it and caused him some trouble. But God tried to help him understand all along. I chose you for this purpose. You didn't choose me, or you didn't gain this influence and power on your own. And that's why, again, it's going to be important for that message to be declared. Because, again, other nations are going to be looking at Israel, and I use that in the broad sense. They're looking at Israel going, how in the world did that happen? Those people had been blessed and helped and aided for all these generations, and now all of a sudden they're being destroyed as if their God is nothing. And somebody needs to go tell them, well, that's because their God was bringing judgment against them for the abominations they had. Go ahead, Jim.
This remnant will probably tell them, well, you're worshiping idols too, like we did, so look what happened to us.
It's possibility. It's possibility. Go ahead, Brian.
Just to go back on the remnant.
Sure.
And I was just looking, ahead a little bit. I think the best definition of what a remnant is, it's in Revelation 12:17. It talks about the dragon and all that, but the remainder of the verse says, the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God.
Yeah.
And have the testimony.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what a remnant is.
Yeah. And from a New Testament perspective, that's the remnant we need to be. We need to be that remnant of people that are willing to obey the testimony and will and purposes that God set before us, to be part of that remnant.
Even of the Old Testament, they're the ones that had.
And it's the same principle, right? Same principle. Good thoughts. None of them right, but good. I'm just kidding. Sorry at home. I'm kidding. They all laugh. You can't hear them do that at home. Sorry. My bad. Next question. I get myself in trouble all the time. What is the significance then, question 3, of Ezekiel clapping his hands and stomping his feet at the announcement of judgment? And look at verse 11. Thus saith the Lord God, smite with thine hand and stamp with thy foot, and say, alas, for all the evil abominations of the house of Israel, for they shall fall by the sword, by the famine, and by the pestilence. And the writer of the workbook, rightly so, shares with us 2 other verses within Ezekiel, or 3 actually, and a text in the book of Numbers that use the same language, right? There's a slapping of the hands and a stomping of the feet in all of those texts. Did that help anybody understand that? I'm not trying to offer you a trick question here. Okay. So I'm the same way, by the way. So I went and read those other verses, and I thought, it didn't give me any clarity, because you don't really know why they did it there either. But then you got to kind of think about it. So if I stood up here and I whacked this table, those of you who had been considering nodding off probably would what?
You want to get their attention.
You'd have their attention. I think it's that simple. It's probably that simple. That there is a passionate approach towards delivering this message. You don't talk about the kinds of destructive things that he's prophesying concerning by saying, now listen, there's going to be, right, you slap your hands and you stomp your feet and you get their attention, because they haven't been what? They haven't been listening. They haven't been paying attention. And so the implication to me here is very simple, that you need to do what it takes to get their attention so that they're listening to this message when it gets delivered. Now, maybe you drew a different conclusion. Maybe you read those other texts and found something else. I'll be glad to entertain that. Other thoughts or answers to that question you might have had. That was the best conclusion I could draw as it relates to that. So what would replace then the sweet smell of incense upon every high hill and mountain at the top of Israel, and who would accomplish this? So let's look at verses 12 through 14. He that is far off shall die of the pestilence, and he that is near shall fall by the sword. He that remaineth and is besieged shall die by the famine. Thus will I accomplish my fury upon them. Then shall ye know that I am the Lord, when their slain men shall be among their idols round about their altars, upon every high hill, and all the tops of the mountains, and under every green tree, and under every thick oak, the place where they did offer sweet savor to all their idols. So will I stretch out my hand upon them, and make the land desolate, yea, more desolate than the wilderness toward Diblath, in all their habitations, and they shall know that I am the Lord. That's a phrase, by the way, if you notice, keeps repeating. All of this occurring so that they will know that I am the Lord. So what replaces the smell of the incense at the altars?
Rotten decay.
Yeah, rotten decay, destruction. And the smell of destruction, from the smell of incense that was offered unto those altars and idols, to the smell of destruction and decay and all the things that would go along with that. And then ultimately, which is a principle we've studied all along through this chapter, who did it? Yeah, this was the Lord's decision. And that was crucial in this. That's what others are going to have to go declare. That's what everybody needs to know, that I am the Lord and I've brought this judgment. And when you look out, or even are present at those altars and idols, the stench has now replaced the sweet smell of incense. And it becomes pretty obvious that a punishment has come to those who have chosen this idolatrous path. Did you have thought, Kent?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
They become like the gods that they serve, which are dead.
Yeah. They trusted in inanimate, non-existent beings, and now it's come to fruition for them. Yeah. Yeah, there's no help from those idols. Didn't protect them at all when God determined it was judgment time. Okay. So jump to chapter 7. So the instructions of God continue. By the way, I didn't say this, but I believe those instructions that come at the beginning of chapter 6 are probably after the 430 days. So you had that situation where he kind of represents that besiegement, and he's laying there by that model that he had built, and then that portion's concluded, and then chapter 6, now go do this, stand and look towards the mountains of Israel and declare this message. And now in chapter 7, theme continues, but another message, if you will. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying. And so question 5 asks simply, what kind of day is the day of the Lord as described by Ezekiel? I'll let you answer that, by the way. You can probably answer that in one word. What kind of day is it? Day of judgment, right? It's a day of judgment that's under discussion. Notice it. Verse 1, Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Also, thou son of man, thus saith the Lord God unto the land of Israel, an end. The end is come upon the four corners of the land. Now is the end come upon thee, and I will send mine anger upon thee, and will judge thee according to thy ways, and will recompense upon thee all thine abominations. And mine eye shall not spare thee, neither will I have pity, but I will recompense thy ways upon thee, and thine abominations shall be in the midst of thee, and ye shall know that I am the Lord. I'll pause for a minute. Let's notice a couple of things within this judgment. Again, so you'll know that I am Lord. Repetitive phrase. But did you what's kind of the sad sentiment that's expressed there? Yeah. All of these things are going to happen, but don't expect any pity. Don't expect, because you might, right? You might expect when, it's kind of when you actually see the result of what you've put in motion, and you might actually shrink back from that when you actually see it happening. And so someone might kind of conclude in their mind, well, wow, when, God has power and right to bring this judgment, and He may send these folks in to start this, but when He begins to see the realities of what that does, then then I think he'll weaken and he'll step back from bringing the fullness of all these things when he begins to witness how devastating it is. And the prophecy basically says, don't what? Yeah, don't expect that. That you should have no expectation that God will feel bad about this, because it's a righteous indignation against a people that should have been honoring Him, whom He had blessed and provided promise and hope to, and they've abandoned Him. And so He's not going to protect them when He chooses to send the Babylonians towards them. Verse 5, thus saith the Lord God, an only evil, behold, is come. An end is come, the end is come. It watches for thee, behold, it is come. The morning is come unto thee, O thou that dwellest in the land. The time is come, the day of trouble is near, and not the sounding again of the mountains. Now will I shortly pour out my fury upon thee, and accomplish mine anger upon thee. And I will judge thee according to thy ways, and will recompense thee for all thine abominations. So the key in that thought process is simply what? That you're going to be judged according to what?
What you're doing.
What you did, yeah. You're going to be judged according to your abominations. The way and path that you determined and chose to take, that's what this judgment is about. And by the way, that's a principle, again, that doesn't change with God. He holds people accountable for what they do and how they behave and what choices and decisions they make. And He tells them it's not going to be any different as it relates to these judgments that are coming as well. And it's on its way. It's on its way. Mine anger has been brought to a point where recompense for thine abominations is necessary in this process.
Can we understand the anger of the Lord? You know what, I don't know if that's a question or not.
Well, I understand, yeah. I mean, can we understand the anger of the Lord is the question. And we understand it much more academically now than they did. They witnessed it, right? They saw it literally be poured out. We have the record. We have to learn the anger of the Lord via historical documentation of how He dealt with mankind throughout the generations. And so we have the record book to learn about His anger. And I think maybe in some ways that becomes, not rightfully so, but it can become a stumbling block to some because we don't witness that kind of immediate, forceful, destructive power and anger of God. And because we don't have that immediate connection to it, we assume that it won't happen at all, that vengeance isn't coming at all for us like it did for them, but it is. Go ahead, Bob. Yeah. That's right. We've got this witness and historical documentation of those things that happened. Yeah. 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 We live in a time where we have to trust the testimony of the witnesses in every aspect. From those who witness God's choices and decisions under the Old Testament law, we're obligated in a sense to understand and appreciate the testimony of those who were contemporaries of Jesus, who were with the apostles. We completely depend on learning these things through the testimony that God reveals through His Word.
The Old Testament is used for our learning.
Yeah, it's there for that very purpose. So how is Judah's worthiness of judgment reflected in the prophet's description of them as a rod that has blossomed and budded? And so just quickly notice with me a couple of verses. Verse 9. And mine eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity. I will recompense thee according to thy ways and thine abominations that are in the midst of thee, and ye shall know that I am the Lord that smiteth. Behold the day, behold, it is come. The morning is gone forth, the rod hath blossomed, pride hath budded. Violence is risen up into a rod of wickedness, None of them shall remain, nor of their multitude, nor of any of theirs, neither shall there be wailing for them. And you can go back to that Numbers 17 text, and you can also, by the way, whose rod's under discussion there? Aaron's rod's under discussion. Same picture kind of thing. Hebrews 9:4 references that moment in history. But what is this picture? That this rod has blossomed. But it's budded with what? And the narrative tells us, by the way. Yeah. Pride's the right. It has budded with pride. Your arrogance, your pride, it has become an abomination before the eyes of the Lord. You caused this. Your choices, decisions, pathway, you've caused this rod that once might have been able to provide guidance and sustenance and help and lead you. It has blossomed into something far different now, into that which is violent and wicked, rather than leading and guiding in appropriate manners. And so their pride has led them there. Go ahead, Kim, I'm sorry.
After it's budded, it's too late.
Yeah.
You can do what you want now, but it's too late. You've already...
Yeah, the fruit of what you did has blossomed. And there's no turning that backwards. There's no acting as if that didn't happen. And that's a good point to remember, that's part of this picture. That these folks, by their choices and decisions, set these matters in motion. But it's reached a point where all the efforts God had made to try to get them to turn from it and to get better and behave better, those days are done. The judgment's now coming. And it's the wickedness and violence and pride has already blossomed, and there's no turning back from that. And now the consequences that come because of it. So in verses 12 and 13, he talks about a buyer and a seller. And he says, "The time has come, the day draweth near. Let not the buyer rejoice, nor the seller mourn. For wrath is upon all the multitude thereof. For the seller shall not return to that which is sold, although they were yet alive. For the vision is touching the whole multitude thereof, which shall not return. Neither shall any strengthen himself in the iniquity of his life." He references us to a moment in the life of Jeremiah, chapter 32. What happened there? Go ahead, Randy. That's right. So land was precious to them, and generally was supposed to be handed down through an inheritance. On occasion, someone would end up either childless or a situation where the poverty hits, where they would sell something off, and a near kinsman would have right to redeem that. I don't have time to explore it. We'll talk a little bit about that next Wednesday, Lord willing. I could give you the 30-second version, but we won't do that. We'll wait. Talk a little bit about that. But they're going to come home. Eventually, people are going to come home. And the retention of land and places, it's going to be a significant conversation. And anyway, so buyer and seller don't need to glory over this circumstance or be overwhelmed by it. So we'll go ahead, Larry. Yeah. Yeah. His chosen has reached a level of abomination that this is the only path he could determine for them to meet recompense for the decisions and choices. It's sad to see him get to that point. Okay, we'll briefly come back, look at the latter part of chapter 7. Go ahead and do lesson 5. Get into chapter 8 as well as we get into our study, Lord willing, next Wednesday.